Mic check, mic check. Testing.
Yep, we can hear you good.
Hey, Eric.
Hey,
Bartek and Amy, how's the sound?
so they can't hear us from where they're at. That we have to raise our hands to communicate to them to then turn up the TV for them to hear.
I noticed she began the recording already.
Hey, sound check. Victor, can you try to let us hear?
Hi, Amy. This is Victor. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Great. And Eric, sound check. Just want to make sure I hear you.
Sound check.
Here.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, perfect. So that was great, Victor. So that's I'm going to mute you all again, but raise your hand just like that if you all have something to share here in the room, because if not, only the folks online will hear you. So we need to make sure we do this. But I'm going to mute you back now. Thank you.
Just for the folks online, they're just doing a few last minute technical issues, and we'll be starting in just a few minutes. For those who've already joined online, thanks for joining us. This is the meeting is going to begin shortly.
Thank you everyone for joining. I see we've had a few new names pop up here. We will be starting momentarily. Thank you all for joining the Kingston Forward Community Draft 2.0 public presentation.
Thanks again to everyone online who's already joined us. There are still folks making their way down the long corridors of City Hall, and the tech team in the council chambers is sorting out an issue, and we'll be starting momentarily. So thanks for your patience. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes.
Thanks again for all those who have just joined us. We will be getting started momentarily. Thank you.
We have a few new folks who have just signed on, so I'll catch you up. We're going to begin the Kingston Forward meeting about the new form-based code very shortly. Bartek and Amy there in the Common Council chambers are just doing some last-minute tech adjustments to for the presentation. Amy Groves from Dover Cole and Partners will be making a presentation. Eric Pate and I'm Victor Dover. We're here in support, and as soon as Bartek and Amy are ready, we will begin the meeting. So thanks for signing on. The folks in the room right now don't hear me unless Amy unmutes it. So that's inside info on what's going on for those 49 of you who have logged in online. So just stay with us just for a few minutes, let them get ready, and then we'll begin.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Victor, can you hear online?
Amy, you want to turn up the volume?
Hang on. Yes.
Hi. Were you asking, could we hear you online?
Yes. Could you hear that?
We can now. We didn't, I could barely make out your question a moment ago, but I can hear you now.
Okay. If we do not use the microphones and we speak like this, can everybody in the room hear? Can everybody online hear that? Okay. We will not use the microphones and we'll see. Hopefully this will work.
Okay. So
All right, Amy, thanks for sorting that out.
There's some of the computers, so we're going to make do with this right now. So my name is Bartek Starguy. I'm the Director of Housing Issues for the City of Kingston. And I'm also leading the zoning change on behalf of the City of Kingston. First, I want to acknowledge everyone that has participated in this process thus far, and especially those of you that have contributed and provided comments in the first draft. When we released the second draft of this zoning code, we provided a response to each and every comment that was provided on the first draft. So the second draft reflects those comments and feedback. And of course, the reason why we're here tonight is that there is one more draft. And of course, we're looking for as much input as possible on that draft to make sure that it reflects the desires and goals of the city as a whole. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Amy. She is going to speak for about 45 minutes, and then there will be a Q&A follow-up. So that's the plan for tonight. Thank you. Amy?
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Amy Groves with Dover Poland Partners, and it's great to be with you here in person and those joining online. Victor and Eric, I can see your faces, so if for some reason you start to not hear me, please wave your hands. So the agenda for tonight here is on the screen. We're going to start out just with an overview about the project, talk about how we got to where we are today, give some sampling of the feedback that we heard on the first draft, and talk about the updates that we made in draft 2. Then we're going to have time for discussion. So we'll start with those in the room, and then we'll move to those who are joining us online. We want to hear your thoughts, your comments on what you're hearing, and we'll answer as many of the questions as we can tonight, and any that we can't answer tonight, we'll get back to you afterwards. And thank you all for the patience with the technical difficulties. We had, I promise, everything was working perfectly until literally 2 minutes before we were scheduled to start. The computer crashed and could not get it started, but hopefully this will stay up. So now I'm here tonight representing a larger team of consultants. We have Victor Dover and Eric Pate from our office joining us online. A much larger group of people who've been working over the past year on this effort. So how did we get to today? Many of you may have joined us here in this room almost a year ago, last November, for a 5-day charrette. We had an initial analysis, visioning work. We started working on the first draft of the code. We had that first draft come out in May, and we had some meetings in June. And so that brings us to where we are now. So we're in the code revisions process, going through there'll be an environmental analysis, the EIS, and then approvals process. We anticipate going through the winter of this year. So here's some images. If y'all weren't able to join us last year, the charrette, we had meetings here in person as well as online. Getting a lot of feedback, learning from people what was important to them. We had our whole team here in the room doing drawings for sample sites, and there's a whole summary of all this work on the website at engagekingston.com. You can go there if you want to get caught up on the process. We had some additional meetings in February for Albany Avenue, Hurley Avenue, and the Waterfront area. And then many of you, I recognize some of your faces from this past June. We had a series of meetings. That's when the first draft of the code came out. We had an online and in-person meeting. We had neighborhood open houses, a walking tour of the waterfront. and public hearing all that month to gather feedback. So when you look at draft 2 online, you'll see orange text throughout the document. So that's basically a way to highlight everything that we changed from draft 1 to 2. So you can, those of you who spend a lot of time studying the first draft, you can understand what's been changed different in this one. So from all the meetings and input we've been hearing, we have this these big ideas. And so for those of you who have been coming over the past year, you're very familiar, but I do see a lot of new faces. So I just want to also cover what is the main things we're trying to achieve here. So first, there's a desire to make smaller incremental development that fits the community vision easier to do by improving and simplifying the approvals process. There is a desire to have new development that fits the context of the surrounding neighborhood, consistent what we call building to street relationships that encourage walkability. There's a desire for a wide variety of housing types and affordable housing, a desire for green, resilient development in the future, desire for new streets to have improved walkability and bikeability, desire to have right-sized parking. So that means enough parking to support businesses, but not too much where it discourages people from walking around or discourages environmental goals. Finally, there is some trouble spots in the existing code that were pointed out to us. And so we're working to clear those up and provide really clear, consistent standards that will be easy to enforce. So you may have heard this term form-based code, and what does that mean? It's basically a type of code that fosters predictable build results by using the physical form as the main organizing feature of the code, rather than separation of uses. So if you're curious to learn more about this, the website formbasedcodes.org is a great resource. You can see all other cities across the country that are using this as a way of doing new development. So here in Kingston, that means that we're looking really closely at the neighborhoods and the urban form and studying how buildings relate to the street, how close buildings are to each other, where the parking is located, and we're writing the rules for new development to fit that. So you'll see here, we call these transects, that's what the zones are, and the higher the number, the more urban the area. So T5 is the highest number. This is your Main Street area, Broadway, or the neighborhoods where you have buildings that are close to the street, closer to each other. As you go down in the numbers, T4, T3, buildings start to get set back further from the street and further apart. So when you're in a T3 or a T2 neighborhood, you have a lot of space between buildings. So this is again a way of really studying what the existing neighborhoods are like, and then writing the rules for future development so that they fit that context. So there's a map called the regulating map that applies the transect zones to all the parcels. There's a large format one over here in the room tonight. There's also one on the Engage Kingston website that you can zoom in and study the details of what's each neighborhood is zoned. So when you dig into the code, you'll see a series of pages like this. This is an example of a T5 district. It summarizes what's permitted there. So how tall buildings are, where parking is, what building types are allowed. All of this is on the 3 summary pages for each district. So when you get into the form-based code, it's organized by a series of articles. So Article 1 is how to use, Article 1 is the overview and definitions. In this section, you'll find a page called How to Use the Form-Based Code. So that's very useful. They'll tell you which articles, where you need to go to look for information. Article 2 is the regulating maps I just spoke about. Article 3 is the transect zone summary standards. Article 4 has general standards. And so they apply rules that apply to all the transect zones. That includes things like affordable housing and parking, and some special standards like the waterfront overlay that just applies in the waterfront area. Street design standards are in Article 6. Article 5. Article 6 is open space. And then Article 7 is what we call the large site standards. And so this is for sites 2 acres or larger. There's some special rules for those. And then Article 8 describes administration, including a streamlined process for small and incremental projects, as we just were as I just mentioned, one of the main goals. So I'm going to walk through some of the topics that we've been hearing a lot about. I just want to give you all kind of a briefing on what we had in the first draft and some of the comments, and then some of the revisions that have been made. So first, permitted uses. So here's an example of a couple of comments that we had on the draft code. Some comments were saying that the code is being too restrictive on some uses. This example is talking about light industrial uses. It says light industrial should be allowed in more places by special permit. Do we want to tell a furniture maker they cannot operate out of their garage if the neighbors think it's okay? Then conversely, we also had some comments like the one here in yellow where it said that the uses were not restrictive enough. So was concerned about potential for a special permit in T3 areas. So when you get into the code, you'll find that there's this use summary chart. The big idea is that we don't have a long, 100-page long list of uses, but we tried to come up with some simplified use categories that would cover a great number of uses. So for example, general commercial and general office. So to make it a little bit simpler to navigate, there is still some special permits that would be allowed for or be necessary for larger footprints or potentially incompatible uses like auto-oriented services or controlled substance sales, things that you want to make sure to get a special layer of review. And then finally, there's some supplemental use standards in Article 4 that give some more guidance on some of the uses, like urban agriculture or bed and breakfast. So here you can see highlighted in orange some of those changes that have been made. And you'll note that we did, from the first draft to the second draft, we that comment about the T3 special permit. So now the T3 neighborhood area does have less mix of uses than in the first draft. And you'll note also that comment about light industrial that is allowed by special permit in more of the neighborhood areas. So you're kind of looking through the orange, you can see where we've been tweaking and changing as a result of some of the comments we've been hearing. So short-term rentals, I know I've been hearing that there's been a lot of talk about short-term rentals. And so I'm going to cover briefly here what's in the code, and I expect during our question and answer session, we might cover a little bit more. But short-term rentals in the first draft, there was a proposal for owner-occupied short-term rentals to be allowed in most districts, and then non-owner-occupied short-term rentals to be permitted in limited areas. There is a provision that short-term rentals must register and must pay a fee. So when we all met here in June, we had our phones and did some keypad polling. We asked everyone, what do you think about this idea? And we actually had some good response. 69% of people who were there that night thought it was a great idea. 14% said they were not sure yet and needed more information, and 17% wanted this revised in the next draft. But then we started hearing more of the comments, and we got more detail on what people were thinking about and thinking about this provision. So, and much of the focus of the written comments that we got asked about increasing the limits specifically for non-owner occupied rentals. So for example, the comment here in the light blue is saying that worried about the housing stock shortage, allowing short-term rentals, and then other comments saying, I'm happy to see non-owner occupied short-term rentals prohibited. I would like clearer regulations. In my opinion, it should be very limited. So what the next draft says is that new short-term rentals that are owner-occupied are allowed in those zones, but new short-term rentals that are not owner-occupied are prohibited. I should say that existing short-term rentals that have a permit would be continued to allow, they would basically be grandfathered in, so this would apply to new short-term rentals. We also updated the definitions. There was some comments asking about clarity. So the key thing that changed is what's here in bold at the bottom of the slide. And that's that the primary residence of the owner should be within the same dwelling unit as the short-term rental. So this is, again, more limiting than what the first draft said, because the first draft defined owner-occupied as being within the same lot. So, for example, you could have a duplex and have your short-term rental in the other So we are very curious to know how people think. I mentioned you saw there was some emails coming in already on draft 2 and on this topic. So I'm going to keep going, but I expect we'll spend some time during our Q&A tonight talking about short-term rentals. And just one more on that topic, we have also gotten some questions. Well, what is the difference between a short-term rental and a bed and breakfast? So, both short-term rentals and bed and breakfast, they're different uses in the code, but they're both residential establishments where up to 5 rooms rented out on a short-term basis. The big difference in how they're defined is that the short-term rentals, new ones in the city of Kingston, will be required to be owner-occupied. A bed and breakfast is not required to be owner-occupied. It could be, but it's not required. But it is required to have staff or the owner on site to support 24 hours a day. So that's more of like a business that is a bed and breakfast versus the short-term rental. So again, I'm going to move on. I know there's probably lots of questions about that, but I want to just kind of give an overview of the other topics. Affordable housing, we also heard a lot about. In draft 1, I should say before draft 1, we heard lots of feedback about affordability as one of the most important issues that we wanted to address. The code calls for 10% of new housing developments with 7 or more units to be affordable. The definition of affordable is defined by 30%. The rent is no more than 30% of the household's income, and there's a maximum eligible income, which is 80% of the Ulster County median income. So I know that's a lot to take in, but it's just basically setting the standard for what qualifies as affordability. There's also a provision in the code for bonus height. So in some districts, in the Chestnut standards, it allows either 1 or 2 bonus stories, and you could get those bonus stories, so an extra floor or extra 2 floors, if you had 20% or more of the units affordable. So this was draft 1. We asked, what do people think about this? So really some mixed reviews, I think, when we met here in June, and really 50% not sure yet. So, needed more time to think about that. By the end of I think we had a month and a half of time for people to review. We got lots of written feedback. And there were a number of commenters that felt the 10% figure was not enough given the need for affordability. But then there were also commenters who supported the 10%, wanting to make sure that the amount was not too much so that it deters development and thus housing will be less housing will be built and less housing then would then be less affordable. So a couple of commenters also expressed that they would like to see the affordable housing apply a larger percentage for buildings with a larger number of units. So going to a key page in draft 2.0 is this chart. That's table 40519. The current draft does maintain the 10% for projects with up to 49 units. So and then also it still has that provision for bonus height and it has up to 20%. But the new information is here outlined in orange. For projects with 50 or more units, they would have 10% affordable units and plus 10% workforce housing units. So the maximum rent figure is a little bit higher for the workforce units. The goal here is really being, balancing a required minimum amount, also with creating a standard that is market feasible and is going to result in the production of new units and more housing that is affordable here in Kingston. So again, curious to get your thoughts on that when we get to questions. I'm going to go on to parking. So we've been talking a lot about parking over the past year. One of the big ideas in this code is that there is not going to be a minimum parking requirement in many of the zones. This does not mean that there's not going to be parking. What it does mean is that individual property owners are going to have the flexibility to decide and provide the amount of parking that they need to serve the uses that are in their building. So the code does establish a maximum amount, and that's to ensure that there's not extra large expanses of parking that disrupt the flow of the neighborhood. So we asked people, what did you think of this idea? When we met in June, we had 50% thought it was a great idea. Another 31% needed more information, and 19% revised this in the next draft. Then again, got a number of written comments. I should mention all these written comments are on the website. So there's several hundred of them, I'll warn you, but if you're curious to read through them, then they're up on the Engage Kingston site. And a number of the comments, there was again some mixed feedback, but a number of the comments were in support of eliminating minimum parking requirements. Owner of a small business, wanting to remove the obstacles that they have seen, or folks who have had to go in for special permits, no longer having to do that. So what is different in this draft, there were some questions about those maximum parking requirements and if they applied to individual homes and people with extended families who might have to park, teenagers who have cars. We clarified that the maximum requirements do not apply to single family homes. They're really meant to apply to big parking lots and parking structures, things that have big impervious ground cover that are going to really negatively impact the neighborhood if they grow too large. And then we also heard a lot of feedback about the bicycle parking requirement, especially for non-residential uses. There was a minimum requirement in draft 1. And so that's actually not in this draft a requirement, it's encouraged. And that's just due to some, there was critique that there's space constraints on a lot of sites and not fit the bike parking in some commercial areas. And so they're encouraged. And we also noted that it could be located in the street right away, working with the city engineer, having bike racks near the business. So on to the next topic. What about building types? So in the draft of the code, we have building types. It's really a key way that we have of shaping development that's consistent with the existing neighborhood form. So we studied the historic buildings through your neighborhood, and we came up with a series of building types, and then we allocated them, in each zone. Certain buildings are appropriate for certain areas. So we got some comments. A lot of them related to the multiplex types. There were some questions about the large multiplex in some of the neighborhood areas being too big of a building for that area. There was some questions about bed and breakfasts and cottage courts. So just there's just a number of feedback about specific types. So as you go through the pages again, you'll see some specific changes that were made. The multiplex specifically, what we've done there is we suggested that it was that 18 units anywhere a multiplex was allowed. In this draft, we clarified to say that in T4 areas, the multiplex would only be 12 units, and in T5 it would be 18. So again, just making sure that the buildings are smaller in the T4 areas. As well as the small multiplex, which in draft 1 allowed up to 6 units. Small multiplex is basically like a large house that has been subdivided into a number of units. In this draft, we clarified that in T3 that it should be 4 maximum, unless those extra units meet the affordability standards. So again, another way, hopefully, to encourage more affordable housing by giving that as an incentive. We have also heard a lot of comments about corner stores. People were excited about this idea, small mixed-use areas, small mixed-use buildings in the neighborhoods, but then also concerns about if that might be too loosely defined and wanting to make sure there's some limits. So going back to our initial survey back almost a year ago, we asked people what they thought about this idea of corner stores, and over 82% of people said they would like to see them allowed. We also learned there's this great tradition of corner stores here in Kingston. This document produced by the Friends of Historic Kingston documented a lot of the history of having these small neighborhood stores throughout the city. So the code does allow corner stores in most zones, but there are limits. Those limits are designed to reduce the impacts on neighbors. So for example, the ground floor commerce use is limited to 3,000 square feet in T3 neighborhoods, which are a lot of the single family houses are. And then as you get into the T4 and T5, the more, if you're middle of your city, it would be 3,500 square feet. There are also limits on the hours of operation. And then there's design standards for shop fronts and industrial locations. So really, all of these things we hope come together to help to make sure that these small mixed-use buildings are allowed, but not in a way that intrudes upon the surrounding neighbors. We asked, or one of the comments we got that we thought was interesting, someone asked, I wonder if all the neighborhoods within the transects of Kingston will now at least allow corner store within a 5 to 10 minute walk. So on the right side of the slide, you can see all the places that corner stores are allowed in. And on this map, we've actually highlighted all of those parcels that are in those zones. So then on this next slide here, highlighted in yellow is an area, a quarter-mile buffer from those parcels. So a quarter mile is generally how far a typical person will walk in 5 minutes. So this is basically your 5-minute walk and then your 10-minute walk. So this doesn't take into account sidewalks or hills, but it does show that there's really great potential for corner stores to be located throughout the city. What about waterfront development? We've heard a lot about, it's really a especially unique part of town that requires some extra attention. On the draft 1 and continuing to draft 2, we have what's called the waterfront overlay. You can see it here on the special requirements map, highlighted in yellow. And in draft 1, here's what those additional standards that apply in the waterfront area, basically requiring for continuous public access, requiring for attractive screening, including environmental protections like significant natural features, the prohibition of septic systems, and the storage of certain environmental contaminants like road salts. Also, there is a provision for it's basically a best practice that's being recommended by the state of New York of designating the 500-year floodplain elevation as +1 foot as the elevation for where new development we have to raise the first floor for residential development. So just for reference, in this draft, we did map the 100 and 500-year floodplain so you could understand which areas of the city that these rules and the flood overlay zones also impact. So obviously along the Hudson and the Rondout, and then not in the waterfront overlay, but in the flood hazard overlay district is also the area along the Esopus Creek. So what was some of the feedback that we got on waterfront development? So we request that waterfront development within floodplains and sea level rise needs to be further reviewed to avoid adverse impacts. A comment about that the standard for tree preservation trees was overbearing in the way that it was worded, and some comments about wanting to have more public open spaces and public amenities along in the waterfront. So here's some of the changes in draft 2. There's some additional language that talks about exhibiting best practices in sustainable design, such as shoreline restoration, floodable parks, increased tree canopy, and there's an updated tree preservation standards that focuses on significant tree stands and mature trees rather than individual trees. So hopefully trying to really preserve those champion trees and those great tree stands, but not in a way that's too onerous for anything else to happen in that area. There's a provision for bonus height that would be limited. I'm sorry, there's a provision for bonus height, new bonus height in this area for publicly accessible open space. So I mentioned before that there were these areas that were allowed for bonus height for affordable housing. What this draft proposes is that in addition to affordable housing, you might get bonus height in exchange for a publicly accessible open space. I will say that you can't stack it. You're still limited to the number of floors in the Transect standard. So 1 floor or 2 floors, that's what they allow. But you could get it either for affordable housing or open space in the waterfront area. So finally, there were questions about industrial uses and that were permitted in special district flex areas in draft 1, and specifically about heavy industry that was allowed by special permit. So the new draft does clarify, or actually prohibits heavy industry in the waterfront area, but it does allow shipyards to continue, as shipyards are defined as a medium industrial use. So there are a number of specific comments about the waterfront and the Punkhaki neighborhood, specifically about the area right in front of Punkhaki being T5 and 2 and 10s for this area, right next to the neighborhood. And so you'll see in the latest draft, draft 2, we've actually changed the map in this area. So we're curious to get some more feedback on that, and if this new map is better meeting the community vision. So I mentioned there's large site standards. So these are sites that are larger than 2 acres, and they allow for what we call a conservation village plan or a walkable neighborhood plan. So these are design standards for subdivision of these large sites. They require street networks, they require public open space, and a mix of building types. The conservation village plan is different from the walkable neighborhood plan in that it requires 50% T1 natural area. So just kind of visualize what that looks like. Here's an example site. On the, this is not in Kingston, it's a hypothetical site, but imagine this is a vacant large site. So if they were to develop as a conservation village plan, 50% of the site would be preserved as open space, and the remainder would be allocated to new lots that meet the standard of the T3 or T4 zone, and new streets would have to be provided to connect to the adjacent neighborhood. The walkable neighborhood plan, conversely, they would be allowed to cover more of the site, and they still have 10% open space requirement, and that mix of building types. So what's new in draft 2? So there's some clarifications on the transect zones, how they can be allocated and arranged. So for example, where you put your T3 or your T5 areas should be informed by the city's comprehensive plan or the open space plan, and should be consistent with surrounding parcels. So like districts should be near like districts. There's also a change for the conservation village to allow T5 building types in those areas if 80% of the housing meets affordable housing requirements. So again, trying to build in more incentives for affordable housing in the city. Promise I'm almost done. I'm on Article 8, administration, that we're going to get to discussion. So administration, one of the big changes that we proposed in draft 1 was the establishment of a new review board and approval process for smaller incremental infill. So that's called the minor site plan. So the minor site plan is applicable for development that is a secret type 2, less than 2 acres and consisting of 1 or 2 lots. And approval for a minor site plan can be approved administratively by the minor site plan review board. Also there you'll find in the administrative section something called minor and major waivers. And as you read through the code, you'll also find things noted. This could be a minor waiver. This could be a major waiver. So these are can be approved. A minor waiver can be approved by the minor site plan review board, and a major waiver by the planning board. Just a picture, the overall development approval process. That new minor site plan review board process is in the darkest blue here. So again, trying to cut out some of the steps and make it easier, quicker, faster for small incremental development that meets all the standards of the code. Major site plans would still follow a pretty similar process to what they do today, going through the planning board. And then as you see to the right here, if you request deviations like a major waiver or a variance, or if you're located in a historic district and you need additional approvals, then there are some additional steps to go through for the approvals process. So some comments that we got on this first draft. First, comments about who is on the minor site plan review board, and it should be professionals and not elected officials. And then also about major site plans. In the first draft, a public hearing was stated as being optional, and this commenter was stating that the major site plans should not be optional. So some of the changes in draft 2, it states the minor site plan review board consists of 3 to 5 professional staff, and it will include the planning director and the building safety officer. And then additionally, those additional spots could be made up from staff from planning, housing, engineering, corporation council, or the building safety departments. And it states specifically that elected officials are not to serve on the minor site plan review. That we also changed for a public hearing to be required for major site plan approval. And then you'll also note, those who read through the first draft of the code, note that some of the administrative sections that we're not changing too much, we simply had references in the first draft, but we've now pulled in the full text of all of those sections and made some refinements where needed to reference transect zones. So now it's completed full text included in this draft for review. So I promise that's the end of my talking. And so now we want to hear from you. So I think we're going to do our questions here in the room first. Did you happen to get the microphone working? Okay, so we're going to start with questions in the room here. And what we want to do is we want to hear from everyone. And if we're able to answer a question, we'll answer it. If we don't know the answer, we might write it down and get back to you. We want to give everyone a chance to let us know what you're thinking about. We're going to do things in the room first, and then we'll move to the online participants to see what additional questions and inputs they have. So, okay. So if you I guess, raise your hand. Does anyone want to go first?
Can you just, this is quick, I'll talk. I just don't really, I just want to know how you're explaining affordable housing. I know you said it, but I don't think.
So,
Amy, you'll need to repeat the question.
So there's a section of the code 40519 that has the definition in it. I'm going to try out of the top of my head, project wrong, but basically there's projects of housing growth.
Right now, we're using definition is 80% of AMI. The workforce housing definition is 100%. So those are the current definitions.
What's the AMI?
So the AMI is set annually by HUD for Ulster County. So that's the number that we're using. It's updated on an annual basis.
Did you have it correctly?
Yes, there's the numbers. Well, this is for 2022, like correlate to the percent AMI, 100% AMI.
Do you have what that number is?
I don't. Maybe someone in this room does, but I don't.
To those listening online, we'll have the room repeat the questions also and improve the audio for the question and answer session.
Yeah, I'm gonna do my best to repeat back. So the questions were, how is affordable housing defined? And the answer was that it's affordable housing is 80% of AMI. The workforce housing is 100% of AMI. And then that number, that the area median income is set by Ulster County on an annual basis. And then the follow-up question was, what is it today? And we don't have that number with us, but there's a hand up in the back. Do you happen to know?
Yeah, the current AMI is over $90,000.
And I'm sorry, but
one of the questions, in addition to that question, is you're setting it at AMI 80%, or you set it by also adjusting for family size.
Yes, adjusted for family
So
size.
that area needs to know that the AMI number $90,000 is not important when you break it down by family size. It's much smaller.
If you'd like to have further discussion on this, I can send you a chart of the files. So it's broken down by family size, right, for different AMI.
I mean, and this is.
Amy, Amy and Bartek.
Okay, so the answer,
Amy.
the question was, what is the AMI? It is 90,000, but that doesn't account for breaking it down by family size. So it's a little more complicated. Once you break down by family size, it gets smaller. Bartek was just saying he's going to post a chart to engagekingston.com so that we'll have some answers there tomorrow. So. Thank you, everyone online. Sorry, the microphones are not working. We'll do our best to relay the conversation.
Okay. So first I just want to say I'm grateful that right across all zones of the city. Short-term vacation rentals, I think that was a lot to help us through our housing crisis. But it seems to me that it doesn't quite work out. We are accepting a previously registered short-term vacation rentals when data gathers about 4 million in they're tracking Airbnb use versus available rental units in the city, and it seems to be that last several months, 60% of our rental units are used for it's pretty extreme. So, what is the reasoning behind exempting previously registered?
So the question in the room is what is the rationale behind exempting existing short-term rentals from the new provisions? And the answer is just because we're thinking of, starting with the adoption, new. So, we'll be prohibiting new short-term rentals, but because those folks have already have a permit, folks who already have a permit for a short-term rental, the current draft is for those to be grandfathered in. Again, curious feedback, what people think, but.
And I can speak a little bit on that as well. So the cutoff date is July 15th. It might be June 15th, 2021. So if you could show proof that you paid Ulster County lodging tax before that time period, at that point, if you have that proof, you can bring that to the building safety department and register for a permit. That permit has to be reviewed on an annual basis, and you have to pay certain additional fees to the city of Kingston. So what we're doing, what we're proposing with the second draft is that we're carrying forward that date of June 15th, 2021 to this current draft. So it's not if you've been operating, if you started your short-term rental this month, right, you wouldn't get that cut off. It's going back to 2021, and that's based on a law that the county council passed earlier this year, regulating short-term rentals.
And I might ask if folks have questions. If you're comfortable coming up, it'd actually be really helpful that people online could hear you. If you're not comfortable, we'll do our best to repeat, but anyone who wants to come up next to the screen here, it might help everyone hear. So.
That's a pre-existing non-conforming use, so you legally can't stop.
Sorry, say that again.
The pre-existing non-conforming short-term rentals can't legally stop because of the existing law. So even if you want to say that you can't do it, so it's harder to do it, as long as it's an excuse, you can't stop them from doing it based on your state law, right?
That's a question that's, I'm kind of wishing I'm supposed to answer.
Yes. Short-term rentals, are you talking just the city of Kingston, or are you talking outskirts? Say, in Kingston, where you pay taxes in Roosevelt, you'd be subject to another question. You also cite a survey that gave some interesting statistics. Who held the survey? How many people answered the survey? What was your response rate? And what were the people that answered the survey with their grandparents?
So I'll answer
You can repeat the question.
I'll answer the second question first. The second question is about the survey. Are you referring to the blue charts that I had in the presentation? Those survey?
But there's also another survey about the initial survey.
Okay, so there's a couple of different surveys that I referenced in the presentation. The one with the blue charts and specifically was about short-term rentals. That one was a meeting that we held here in June. It was online and in person. Do you remember the number of people we had?
A couple dozen.
I think it was more than that.
Yeah.
We had a couple dozen in person and then we had like another 30, 40 online. But it's certainly not a statistically valid survey. It was just a sample of people who showed up to a meeting about the form-based code draft 1. We asked them what they thought and that's what they said. But I wouldn't say that's a statistically but it was just a sampling of what we've been hearing so far. So that's That was the second question. And
Yeah, it
then,
was just a snapshot of the people that were attending a particular meeting. We did do another survey at the beginning of this process. The response rate was higher, right? I believe in the hundreds for that one, but again, it's not randomized.
So it's not statistical.
No, no.
Bottom line, patients as far as the short-term rentals.
so the question is where if you don't,
Where's your authority?
It's only for the boundaries of the city of Kingston.
that's right.
Just on.
Yes, exactly.
Let's do Victor first.
Continuing the conversation about certificate of payment of tax, which apparently is July 15th. Is that referring to owner-occupied or is that referring to non-owner?
So the question is whether the cutoff date of July 15th, 2021 refers to owner occupied or non-owner occupied. It does not distinguish.
Okay, because that strikes me as a little bit, are we about to comment there?
You can offer a brief comment. That's fine.
That struck me as a little restrictive. I'll just use my situation as an example. I was a homeowner in Greater Ulster County and had a Airbnb there. And then I moved here last year, so I have an owner-occupied house, which I only started to rent application in 2022. And the one pays the hotel tax. It's not required to be paid every quarter. Many people pay yearly. So this date of July 15, 2021, not only struck me as restrictive for anyone who's owner occupied, who's new to the area, who's on vacationing, renting out their house here. A, B, if you pay your taxes at the end of the year, strikes me as a strange date to choose as a product.
Do you know the rationale for that date specifically?
Amy and Bartek. Amy, Bartek.
Yes.
Yeah, we're getting a number of people typing in requests online regarding the audio problems. And so if you could, we couldn't hear anything she just said, for example. So if you could please, after one of the people in the audience asks a question, slowly and clearly, close to the microphone, repeat what they asked, and then say, and now here's the answer, and then repeat the answer, because folks are having a hard time online. Thank you.
So the comment was that the July 15th, 2021 date for short-term rentals seems arbitrary based on how the lodging tax is typically paid. That date, that July 15th date, we're pulling forward from legislation that the common council passed. Certainly, we can take a closer look at it for the next draft.
Is there
I'm gonna
here and then here?
My question, has there been any effort by the city to provide Dover Cole with lists of parcels with contentious histories where the property owners have attempted to rezone, but then prevented by government departments or elected bodies? Just so Dover Cole doesn't inadvertently rezone.
Did the folks online hear that? Did I need to repeat? Okay, so the question is, has Dover Cole been provided with a list of parcels or recent zoning requests to know if they were contentious and know that history in the zoning process? Is
So we
that
don't inadvertently rezone by accident against the will of the council or city department.
Okay, I think that's the purpose of the zoning process, right? Going to the drafts to make sure that we get the input on everything that we need.
So the city didn't provide you with lists.
I mean, the city works closely with Dover Cole to discuss specific parcels, right? In multiple departments within City Hall are part of this process, of course, alongside the public input process.
So no,
We don't sort of provide specific lists of specific parcels
that have been challenged by the city.
that have been challenged by the city, no.
gonna go here and then here.
Thank you. So I'd like to return to the affordability requirement for the new buildings that have 7 or more units. It strikes me that 10% affordability does not fit lessons learned from other cities for these requirements. Only look for our neighbors to the south, New York City, and see what happens in neighborhoods like Williamsburg or Williamsburg, Brooklyn, or Long Island City, Queens, to see that 10% affordability requirements. Yes, it needs spurs a great deal of development, but it needs to strengthen assets with luxury units sitting vacant and gentrification. So ask what the reasoning is for 10% requirement for
I'm going to do my best to rephrase. So the question is about the 10% affordability requirement and concerns that the 10% is inadequate and citing specifically experience in New York City and seeing a too low percentage leading to gentrification and producing a lot of units, but not enough affordable units. So wanting to know why the 10%.
Yeah, so I think as you heard, we did add a 20% requirement for projects that have 15 or more units. So just wanted to clarify that. There's also a density bonus. So if you get to 20% affordable, you get an extra floor height for that incentive. I think that the general thinking of the 10% mandatory number is to balance, right? So we don't want to discourage new housing development. So it's an attempt to get at that balance, right? Which what is the right number? So we do not discourage new housing. With this draft, we're removing as many barriers to housing development as possible. Right now, parking mandates, setback requirements make it very difficult to build new housing in the city of Kingston. With this draft, we're trying to remove as many barriers as possible to building housing going forward. So the 10% is an attempt to get to that balance. So welcome, of course, any feedback on that. That's how we arrived at that figure.
That for new housing?
Yes. The question was, is that for new housing? Yes, it's for new housing.
Hi, so I'm going back to short-term rental again. I just got a question regarding the city. I wasn't present for the previous meeting, so I'm really new to the process, but from what it appears that decisions have been made going forward in terms of what constitutes a legal or illegal short-term rental. I'm wondering what kind of process is being put in place to measure the need for additional housing and more affordable housing, which I'm 100% in favor of, but also looking at the tax base and revenue that short-term rentals do bring into the city of Kingston, not only in terms of the lodging aspects of the short-term rental, but of dining, shopping, retail, etc. I'm a small business owner, and I have a short-term rental in Kingston. I've lived here for 15 years, and I feel like it seems like this conversation has gotten a little skewed and not looking at the bigger picture of what the housing looks like with the short-term rental or renting short-term, and what the overall effect is going to be on people who have a small business. I think that it seems to me like a lot of the talk online is about people saying big corporations coming in and buying up all the housing, having management companies come in and manage these short-term rentals and Airbnbs, and the money's going to California or Florida or whatever for absentee owners. And 100% of the people that I know that do short-term rentals in Kingston, they are all residents of Kingston and have their own homes in Kingston, and they're using the short-term rentals as an income property to help them live in Kingston and better the community. And I don't know, it seems to me like there hasn't been a lot of emphasis put on what's being contributed by people that are owning and managing short-term rentals who actually live in Kingston and not live outside Kingston.
Thank you. For those online who didn't hear, I'm going to do my best to recap. So the main thrust of the comment, I think, was about reframing the discussion on short-term rentals and wanting to look at who's renting the short-term rentals, and are they residents here in Kingston versus large corporations doing short-term rentals, and if they are residents here in Kingston that maybe having that supplemental income and benefits going to city residents would be a good thing. And so maybe that's a new part of the short-term rental puzzle that should be looked at. Did that do it justice? Okay.
Yeah, to answer your question, I have not seen economic analysis on the impact of short-term rentals in the city of Kingston, nor have I seen analysis of the host information. I do know the numbers of the number of short-term rentals, but not to the specificity that you asked.
I think we'll take, let's take 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 more comments here in the room, and then we'll do some online. So, over here first.
My name is Liz, and my husband and I speak to what you're talking about. We have an Airbnb. We are not actually residents of Kingston. We live 30 minutes outside. But we created that this would be a place. And we took an old house that had been a law office for 40 years, and we turned it back into residential structure at excellence, and have been finding that it is a really wonderful experience, and we do see that our guests are, attending all kinds of functions here. They're going to weddings here. They are eating, and they're going to all the restaurants, stores, and that, in addition to that we hire exclusively local people to do anything we can actually do ourselves, and put a lot of money into the revenue stream of the city through purchasing of all of our materials to upgrade the house, bring it back into a housing stock. And I think partly to address the question of why should we not just say that's it, no matter when you are occupied, you can't do it anymore. Because we put a lot into it, because we have been doing it for a number of years. We put a tremendous amount of our own personal energy and time and effort and money into and into believing in Kingston.
Yeah, I think it's very cool about coming in to LA, sorry, and buying up all these places. Just for us, just to be our retirement. Maybe, Trevor was sold and so some people are saving money, investment funds, whatever. We don't have to do that. We have to build this as artists. This is the outcome. So, yeah, your investment. Yes, of course, long term, housing, housing for people who can't afford housing is very expensive. It needs to be addressed, but I just think it's separate here in the conversation.
Let me just review really quick and then come back. So for those online, we was just sharing an anecdote of short-term rental owners here who sharing they renovated
Amy.
a loft. Yes.
Amy, I'm sorry. You're getting through a lot more clearly when you're near the laptop than you are with the handheld. It was working a lot better when you were doing whatever you were doing before. So if you could just, the last speaker, we couldn't hear anything. Just letting you know, you could tell that we're talking. That was it. Thank you.
Okay, so the short recap. So they're sharing their experience as not in the city of Kingston residents, but nearby, and they have a loft space that they've renovated and have been using as an Airbnb. And we're just recounting how the guests who stay there support Kingston businesses and go to events here in Kingston, and they use local workers to rehab the place. And so they really are. There's a lot more that goes into the Airbnb that does support the local economy, and it is their retirement plan of that they've been investing in. And so they are just individual owners who own this one Airbnb and wanting some it's not necessarily a large corporation, but just wanting to add comment and commentary to the Airbnb. Is that okay? I tried my best. Okay, let's. I'm going to do two more. Over here.
Thank you. Also just wanted to give some commentary. My first stay here when I came to Kingston, back when our president was vice president, some of the director ago, I think actually everybody is owned by my alderman now. Kind of a small world. And now we're actually, we have 2 units on Green Street. We've got a house that was falling apart, very old. And turned around, the historical marker on Super Truth. We have a lot of property people really appreciate that. People are coming to stay with us with families like me, that kids who are looking to Hudson Valley. So it's not, it's not like a hotel. One of the things I want to just, the fact that it's around 5 house per day and seeing it is, I think, really helps in terms of actually taking that and getting it back to the houses. But more importantly, if you do get too strict on short-term rentals, that wasn't going to say anything. We're not going to go back to the city. It's not going to say anything. So that's just something to keep in mind. These are units that are optimized for live in. What is it like when I live in Kingston? That's what kids who are actually living in places you could live in the future. So it's important to keep in mind that actually it's very also the money is as a certain version of the code. Dwelling unit, I would like clarification on what a dwelling unit is. Maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but it seems to me that a dwelling unit is the same space, but I don't know whether that refers to, for example, you make 3 families. Is that the argument? Or is it just one?
Okay, so there's more commentary on short-term rental and not wanting to be too restricted, and making the point that a lot of folks who stay in the short-term rentals are actually people who are considering moving to Kingston and wanting to try out, see what Kingston is all about. So it brings a lot of people to experience Kingston, and so making sure that we're not being too restricted on that. Then the question was about owner occupied. If you have a 3-unit building and you live in one of the units, what counts as a dwelling unit? So the way that code draft 2 is written, that was actually one of the updates that was made, that it would be actually within the same unit. So if you had a 3-dwelling unit, you could not rent out as a short-term rental the other 2 units, because those are separate units. So that was a change from draft 1 to 2. We are curious to get feedback if you think that's going in the wrong direction. I think I see you raising your hand. That's
Airbnb. Most of the rentals on Airbnb and things that are not private. They are entire.
So the comment is that most Airbnbs in Kingston are not private rooms. They are separate units. So by making that change in the definition, we are prohibiting most of the Airbnbs that are existing.
We're banning
Airbnbs. Well, not, the question is, are we banning existing Airbnbs? So if you're registered, right, with the city, with that cutoff date that we referenced earlier, 2021, then you would be allowed to continue.
So going forward, it's only private, and everyone else is going to.
Again, this is the draft, so we are looking for input, but as currently written, that is the case, yes.
So you're saying if you live in a 3-family, you live in
Are you just to clarify on that, if you live in a 3-family home, you live in one apartment, but you're renting out the other 2 in Airbnb, that's, you're saying right now that's kosher or not? That's not kosher. Unless you register, you register, yes.
And just a note, as we continue to take comments, I know a couple people have had to leave and some people online may have to leave. So just, we are collecting feedback through the end of the month. And so obviously everything that's being heard tonight is being recorded and we have these comments, but if you have additional thoughts, additional comments, this is how you give them. You can go online to engagekingston.com to the Kingston Forward Project and submit your comments. You can also send them directly to Bartek here. You can come in person in City Hall, or you can email them to Bartek, and his email address is here.
Yeah. If
Amy.
if anyone is online.
Amy and Bartek. Sorry, I just want to make sure you, since you're not reading as you go, we've assured the people that are online and just to hang on through these audio difficulties, because you're going to switch to taking questions from online participants when you finish doing so with those who are there in person.
We're going to take one more question in the room, and then if you're online would like to ask a question or speak, please raise your hand. Any other questions on the room? Yes.
Hello. I'm Justin. I'm resident here in Kingston and for over 5 years. I'll make a comment and a question. Just acknowledge the defensive space and presence for concern for folks who are currently doing short-term rentals. And I want to express compassion for those folks who likely and they're applying for time working later in those efforts. And I want to also present some very real stories of the folks in our community who have been displaced and are becoming displaced and are going to be displaced very soon because of our issues. And so I just need to put that out there because we have to weigh the human cost. Who have been displaced, myself and fellow tenants were displaced, and it does fundamentally cut at the question of food. So I'm not to say that short-term rentals are the only issue, but they are definitely a component. We have a paradigm shift in the last few years that has completely shifted from the amount of Airbnbs that are possible. We have people specifically come for their own reasons why to benefit on that and not provide long-term housing, short. And that is a real challenge for folks who want to stay in Kingston. Or the folks who are still like is it all? So the question I have is, how are we classifying urban short owner occupied, specifically because I think it's the criteria is primary residence, and how that would be proved so that it could be safe.
So I'm just going to briefly repeat here for folks online. The comment was we need to better balance, right? Certain owners of short-term rentals have invested a lot of time and energy in units. At the same time, we have a housing crisis in the city of Kingston, and people are being displaced. The question was specifically, I think, is one of enforcement. So how are we improving the individual occupiers and primary residents, so that once the zoning code is passed, we'll work on the enforcement process, which will be handled by myself and the.
Do you want to do the? Yep. Okay. So now we're going to take a few questions from folks who have been patiently waiting online, and Bartek, one by one, is going to promote people with their hands up into the meeting so they can share their thoughts. And so I think it's Yana Fisher, you're the first one, and you can unmute.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your time. So in short, I have been Airbnb-ing my place in Kingston for the past 6 years. I echo everything that everyone else is saying. I've had guests from all around the world. I've had people who are buying in the area. people that come for local events, et cetera. I think you know all the tourism revenue that it brings to the city of Kingston, the great city of Kingston. My question is, I had a permit when you guys first started issuing permits. I think it was like well over a year ago. Then there were new requirements that I had to then get an inspection, which I got an inspection, and now they reissued me a permit. So I'm assuming that I am now a part of that group that I technically don't need to be owner occupied short-term rental. One, is that correct? And then two, how long will that be grandfathered in? Is it indefinitely, or is it until you guys change the laws again? Thank you.
So the answer is yes, you would be, I guess the term is grandfathered. And so long as you continue that use, where the law has changed, I suppose, but you would continue, forever, basically. There's no time limit set.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, Diana Lopez is the next speaker. All right, Diana, you can unmute.
Hi, this is Bravin Runga. I'm here speaking on my coworker Diana's computer. Really appreciate the mayor's office for having this public listening session. And again, with For the Many, we organize hundreds of people here in the city of Kingston. And the issue that we hear the most commonly from people is they can't find a place to live, or they can't afford the rent or the cost of a new home. And a huge reason for this is because a large amount of our available housing stock is being taken up by Airbnbs. And the issue isn't owner-occupied Airbnbs. If it's your primary residence and you rent it out a couple days out of the year, the problem is owners renting out entire units exclusively as Airbnbs. And this takes up our available housing stock, which makes it harder for people to find a place to live. It raises prices, both for tenants trying to find a place to rent, but also it increases home prices. So it's harder for people to find a home to buy and dig roots into our community. And it also just turns our residential neighborhoods into unregulated hotel districts, which harms the character of our residential neighborhoods. And so we really applaud the mayor's office for choosing to prohibit new non-owner occupied short-term rentals in all zones in the city. We urge them to take it a step farther and retroactively prohibit non-owner occupied rentals in all zones and not grandfather in existing ones, because we need that housing stock to be freed up for long-term residents. I also just want to address the point about tourism. Tourism, of course, is important, and we want tourism to happen. But the most important consideration that city government should make is what is best for long-term residents. And in order to grow our city in a sustainable way, it needs to be an affordable place to live for the people that currently call Kingston home. That's how you grow businesses, that's how you build jobs, and that's how you create a thriving community. And so I don't think that we should emphasize tourism at the expense of housing affordability. And I think the new zoning code gives us an opportunity to find that balance by prohibiting the non-owner occupied short-term rentals because it's a housing affordability issue. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I do want to say while we're waiting that tonight is the last night that the city of Kingston will be using this technology, hopefully for hybrid. I've heard a rumor that tomorrow the new hybrid technology arrives here and is being installed over the weekend. So hopefully the next time we have a meeting like this will be a different situation. So thank you all for your patience tonight.
All right. You are next to the, please unmute.
Hi there. Hopefully everyone here can hear me. Thanks so much for having this call and for having this conversation and handling all of our questions. I have two questions / comments. The first one is to the previous speaker. Sorry, I missed your name, but I'm just curious about how prohibiting short-term rentals will solve affordability if my short-term rental has to become a long-term rental, it will rent for much more than the average rents in the area. So I'm just curious, one, how that will solve that issue. And then two, I'm also looking to get more information on potential penalties and when there will be some documentation provided around what the penalty structure will look like. Thanks.
Should we have penalties for just that?
So I believe the question was around penalties, and those penalties are not outlined. And it is part of the enforcement, should this based on passing. So there's no penalty. That would be part of the enforcement. I have no further questions on that to speak.
We just had Amanda raise her hand. Bartek.
Okay, we're going to do one question here in the room and then we'll go to Amanda next.
Okay, sounds good.
So I just spent the last 3 days at the conference of mayors conference in Saratoga, and we talked a lot about the issues and what other cities are doing. I don't think cities can there, unfortunately. But one thing we discussed at length was Yoshi's messenger. The owner occupied law that New Orleans had struck in the Constitution 2 weeks ago because it discriminated against people on the basis of the residency where they lived. How are you going to obviously address what sounds like laws in a way that's enforceable? Because it sounds like the enforcement friendly to what you're trying to do.
So the question in the room is asking about stating that Airbnb law in another city, New Orleans, I think, where it was challenged as being unconstitutional to define it by owner occupied. And so the question is, how is the enforcement going to take place here?
I think that's part of the process. Drafting we work on a case law who's helping us put this together. And then obviously we work very closely with different departments in City Hall, the Corporation Council on drafts and things.
Hi, I just wanted to speak to the comment and then a question. I just wanted to speak to all of the Airbnb owners who have come to represent tonight, keep talking about how much money they bring in through tourism, but I think local people support the local economy the best as full-time residents. And Kingston is a community before it's an investment opportunity. So protecting and helping our local people find housing should be the priority. And also I wanted to say, sort of echoing the for the many representative, if what we have here is sort of already recognizing that the main goal is to help with our housing affordability crisis, why are we allowing short-term rentals to be grandfathered in? How does that follow rationally if we know that this is the issue? Thank you.
Amy and Bartek, if you're answering, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me, Victor?
You're going in and out. Did you get up close to the microphone where Amy was? We might be able to hear your answer to the question.
Hey, I'm not answering that question. I don't have an answer for that question.
Okay, well, just the mic went silent. Thanks for clarifying.
Got it. Matt, you're up.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Hi, thanks for having me. I just wanted to kind of ask a question about what I've heard tonight at this presentation. Just one point of thought with regards to the short-term rentals. Perhaps the city should consider classifying those as non-homestead parcels and taxing them as commercial properties rather than residential. I don't know if they're already doing that, but should be something to consider. Second question I have is everything I've heard tonight about this new rezoning or form-based zoning seems to be very accommodative to affordable housing projects, which is a great thing. But that really leaves me scratching my head, wondering why next week there's a spot zoning request for the affordable housing project at Golden Hill. You know, why aren't we waiting for this new form-based zoning code to take effect? Because it seems to be very accommodative to affordable housing projects, whereas the existing zoning code isn't. So I'm just a little confused why we're seeking to rezone that property under O2 when the form-based zoning is more appropriate for affordable housing projects. Thank you.
I can briefly answer the Golden Hill question now. Those property sponsors are seeking that rezoning under the current zoning code, and it is their right to do so. And they're choosing not to wait for the new zoning code. So, you know, the current zoning code is a lot of land, so they'd like to go in under that zoning code. I assume based on, you know, the development timeline that they have.
I'll say too, I mean, we're working as quickly as we can on this, on this draft, but we still do have, a few more steps to take where we have a final draft, and then going through the approvals process will take some time. So certainly you can't ask everyone to pause for all that time. So as Bartek mentioned, the current laws are the current laws. And then when this takes effect, potentially early next year, that's when the new rules would apply.
All right, we're going to go back to in the room here. Tanya, your hand is up first. So I'm going to go to you.
Thanks. And they can hear better if you stand up there.
Yeah.
So in the city of Kingston, is this good here?
Yeah, that's great. You can just use the mic as well.
In the city of Kingston, we have the way that the city of Kingston most often does multimodal infrastructure improvements is a very top-down process, because we do it primarily with grant money, and there's a timeline, and the funders have specific requirements. And for instance, the former director of grants management once, actually more than once, has told us that they didn't want to have too many cooks in the kitchen. They already have too many moving parts, so they have the very minimum that's required in terms of public engagement. In this code, we've got street design standards, and Rick Hall, the street designer, made an excellent point. Actually, when Kristen Wilson, the former director of grants management, gave an anecdote about Broadway and why we have such small bike cycle track, that's a thin cycle track with a thin buffer and wider travel lanes. She said we asked the funders, part of the funding was from the New York State Department of Transportation, which is very highway centric. And they had to ask for a lot of things with sort of a more equitable approach to street planning, and they were often turned down. And Rick Hall of Dover Coal, of the team rather, made a really great point, and this is part of the question, that if we have standards, street design standards, then we can say to the funders, instead of asking, we can say, in Kingston, we do it this way. We require this and this way in this Kingston. Do you feel, so this is the consultants, that this second draft will be able to be used in that way? Will we be able to say to the funders, in Kingston, we do it this way. So these are our parameters.
Victor, do you want to take that one? I see you on mute.
I'm assuming by funders, you mean, for example, the New York State Department of Transportation.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, this is definitely an important step. The state has their own manuals and their own standards. They also have processes for what they call design exceptions, when it's necessary to do something that would work even better than what's in their book or in their manual. And it is a really important step in the filling out of those forms for the basis of design exceptions, to have local adopted support for those alternatives. So this is a key bridge between what the state might be working on, but not always getting right yet, and what Kingston has figured out. And that's what Rick Hall was getting at when he said, put these things in your standards before you turn to the state or other agencies for their money or their help.
I just have to do a very brief follow-up. I found it unfortunate that the Complete Streets Advisory Council gave some pushback on the street design standards. It actually really wasn't the whole council. There were a couple of members who really gave the most pushback and command the most authority on that council. Do you feel like is there more that can be done with our street design standards to have even more teeth than this draft does? Yeah.
Potentially, I would want the city engineer to be part of a discussion on this. The problem with making the standards too specific is that, Kingston is an old city, right? So sometimes there's some customization that needs to happen.
Or not more specific, I think more with more standards and less guidelines.
The service that we can look at and discuss. All right, I'm gonna go to the middle.
Hi, thanks. I also wanted to make a comment, concerns about affordability. 10% of housing seems very low. And I'm curious why 50 units was chosen as the threshold for increasing it to 20%. And if there's an analysis of how many parcels that would even apply to, or how many transects that would apply to, it just seems like a large portion of the building still, go 49 units and do 4 units affordable housing. So yeah, just looking at what analysis is on that.
Yeah, that was based on some peer analysis, basically, of these final projects. So the 15 good national for these projects. The good news is that there's a lot more also in the city. I know Amy or Aaron might be able to answer this, but this is all of T5, of course, and right, which is a good portion of the city.
Right, but it has the 2 stories.
Could you also repeat the question again, please?
Yeah. Oh, the original question was asking about the 50 unit threshold for affordable housing and how that number was arrived at as the threshold for when it would become 20% instead of 10%.
And the second part of that question, Aaron, which you might answer, is how many parcels in the city would be eligible for a 50+ unit project?
Yeah, I mean, in general, most parcels, city parcels are smaller parcels that would not provide the footprint needed for something of that size. There are a few larger parcels around that would be eligible for larger structures, but yeah, they're fewer and farther between, if that was what you're getting at, Bartek.
Yeah, but at the same time, there are, of course, large projects that are that are approved, right? So the Kingston analysis would be part of this requirement. There are other larger projects that are over 50 units too. So there are projects that we have to apply this.
Victor, you have your hand up?
I did. Whatever Bartek just said, we couldn't hear any of it. I'm just letting you know, it didn't get on the recording. You might want to repeat it. We can hear you, Amy. We just don't seem to be able to hear Bartek.
My summary there is, I just mentioned that there are projects in the pipeline that are over 50 units. that would meet this threshold.
Whatever you just changed worked. That was good. That was better. Thank you, Bartek.
Yeah, I just want to talk about what I've been hearing, both with the conversation or motion, where it sounds like we were okay. We need to prioritize residents. And there are some residents who cannot live in Kingston. There are some residents who use Airbnb as a source of income. So maybe the line draw is not about who are your current residents. Maybe it's more about who are the residents who actually may contribute to this town.
So the comment was about wanting consideration in short-term rentals about City of Kingston residents, and if that there is a need for providing affordable housing for City of Kingston residents, but also that short-term rentals can provide a source of income for Kingston residents. And so thinking about that, is that an accurate? Okay, so that just thinking about that in the short-term rental question.
Thanks. I had two questions. One is about the small multiplex. All the units they classify as multiplex.
Yeah, so the question is for small multiplex, if a 3-unit building, so the way the code is written, yes, if you were to build a new 3-unit building, you would call it a small multiplex. What's that?
What about existing?
So existing buildings that exist. So you would only, the code would just apply to new development, or if you're making dramatic changes, there's rules for like the percentage of improvements that you make, that once you pass, is it like 50%, I think? I have to look that up. But once you pass the threshold, then the code applies. So that's when, so yes, if you were making improvements to of above like 50% of the value, then that you would call it small multiplex.
So the reason we ask is because we have a building where we have 1,600 square feet of empty space that we couldn't make an apartment because we didn't meet the parking requirements. So that's what we're asking, can this small multiplex that already has the units that we add into it now we have these parking requirements?
Yes, so the parking requirements, there would not be a minimum parking requirement.
And then a follow-up question, let's say I have a building with 10 units and they're all 2 bed except for 1 bed, is that 1 bed in the affordable housing?
Sorry, repeat that.
How is 10% affordable housing measured? Like, let's say I have a building with two bedrooms in all, instead of 1, just go 1 bed. Is that 1 bed the affordable housing? How is it affordable? How's 10% measured?
It's the number, the question is, how do you count the 10% affordable? It's of the units. So if you have 10 units in a building, then 1 unit would have to meet the affordability thresholds.
Could you choose the smallest unit?
It's sort of an extreme example. It's the stated in the code that the affordable housing.
The question is, can you pick the smallest unit as your affordable unit?
Yeah, we would have to look at that specific example. The code is quite clear that the affordable housing units have to be the same, pretty much the same quality, right, and size as the regular housing units. So we would have to look at that specific case to determine that example.
I just want to thank everyone for investing this much time and hearing all the different opinions on all of these very topics. I just want to speak on behalf of one specific part. Kingston is called West Chestnut Street, and it's on National Rent Street places, and several households in the room are members of West Chestnut Street. It is very important to all residents of West Chestnut Street that we retain the same designation throughout the street. Current plan, as well as the first time, corner of West Chestnut Street, Waterfront is segmented from the rest of the street. It's a TM4 transect. I would just like to say this probably doesn't need this room. I'd very much like to see the entire West Chestnut Street made TM3 designation. I also want to thank you all for the time, patience, attention to this work. The professionalism is at
So the question is about West Chestnut Street specifically on the regulating map, and the fact that there's a parcel at the end of near Matropos on West Chestnut that is in a T4 area, and the comment is that it should be a T3 area. And we did have that comment in amongst the comments, and we made some adjustments to the building types that would be allowed in T4, but I expect we're going to have some additional conversation about that site specifically. And so, yeah, we'll continue the conversation.
Any other comments from any of you folks? Okay, then we're going to go back to.
In regards to the affordable requirements, the code states that building owner will maintain documents affordable, and those records will be submitted to shortly by. That is said, if somebody gets a raise, they know requirement that they now have to.
So the question is about there's in the Affordability Administration section for as far as meeting the income requirements. If somebody qualifies for a unit and then they get a raise and they no longer meet that threshold, do they have to move?
I think that's not the intention, and I think that comes down to what are the enforcement regulations once this is passed and how the city is actually enacting the standards. I would say I don't want that. I wouldn't want that scenario to actually happen. Yeah.
I have one more about the accessory dwelling. It's just in general, the land is in place, so we just don't put in on the streets as, you know, as maybe 15 houses. If you put 15 accessory dwelling units into that neighborhood as well, that's a significant increase in parking, it's a significant increase on electricity demand, on the needs of the water and sewer system, and the infrastructure in the area might not have been built with those sorts of demands being anticipated, just how might that be addressed so that there's sufficient water pressure in the sewer system doesn't back up. If there's enough brownouts and sufficient electricity being provided to the area, you know, demands in the area significantly expand as things get denser.
So the question is about accessory dwelling units and a concern about if there's a large number of accessory dwelling units built in a neighborhood where they weren't before, can the infrastructure of the neighborhood handle that, the electricity, parking, all the extra demand for those additional units in the neighborhood? So I'll start this answer. I don't know, Victor and Eric, if you want to jump in at all, but I think the intent behind the accessory dwelling unit provision is, allowing, kind of removing obstacles to this housing form that we find to be, beneficial in a lot of cities across, it provides, a place for, elderly, who are aging to live, with near their kids. It applies, kids can live, college students come back. Also, more affordable units in the neighborhood, there's just a number of benefits to allowing them. The observation in a lot of places that pass these rules and when they have a lot of restrictions is that none get built because it's, really difficult for a homeowner to take on, all of what's needed to do, if there's a lot of barriers to that. So this draft is looking to try to, there's some common sense barriers in there, like the size, like that they're not oversized or, but we really tried to limit the number of barriers so that to make it easier for people to do that in these drafts. I'm curious, if there's, folks who have feedback on that. We are, wanting to gather more thoughts, but that's how we arrived at what we have currently. And I don't know, Victor, Eric, anything else?
Just this one thought for folks who want to learn more about accessory dwelling units. There's a great third-party summary of their benefits and best practices related to implementing them. That's online in, of all places, the website for the AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons. AARP did a lot of research about the question because many of their members were wondering, is this a good idea? Is this a thing we want in our neighborhoods? And they came back with a very full-throated, enthusiastic response to that. based on research from all over the country. So I think of all the places you might want to go check it out, go see what AARP found in their research. We actually consulted that document when we were working on the ADU provisions in the ordinance. So among many other sources for best practices.
In addition, a few thoughts on that, the general idea there of looking at new residents moving into neighborhoods and being concerned that might be too much pressure on infrastructure. Looking at historic development trends, it's sometimes that we can see that some neighborhoods actually have much less people than they did previously, and that didn't necessarily influence and impact infrastructure, mostly because that was pre-car. So there are a variety of ways to look at addressing that, and ensuring that looking for ways to provide housing in a more walkable urban framework does reduce the amount of pressure put on local infrastructure as well. So all these combined, play into this conversation.
Ventures, and we just wanted to mention that for us, we're very encouraged by the new recommendations, and as hopefully future homeowners also encouraged by the building regulations is going to allow for us to be able to achieve both of those things and for the state for renters and for future homeowners. And I had a question about ADUs. For the regulation around whether or not it's safe or not occupied with an ADU or not occupied for a short-term rental.
Actually, the question is about short-term rentals in ADUs. And actually in the draft, that is one of the provisions that we are currently not proposing to allow an ADU to be allowed to become a short-term rental. So it just that would not be allowed.
Prohibited in current
I guess we have one last question here, and this will be our last question.
I wonder if we are using residents, full-time residents, saying that operating for like local partners, purchase our buildings, we did not renovate the property, so we're owner-occupied, but that commercial and residential zone properties, we will be able to continue to be artists and our personal businesses, living in the city, so I just want to say that housing crisis is a real issue. I just think that like many things about it, so we're examples of something that we're very probably in.
This was just for the folks online, another comment about short-term rentals and wanting to just emphasize that short-term rentals provide benefit. That another example of a City of Kingston resident who is occupying a short-term rental and is providing great benefit to them. And so, there's a lot of nuance to the question and understanding the concerns about affordable housing, but also wanting to understand the perspective of the short-term rental. Is that okay, trying my best to synthesize that. Okay, great. Okay. I think that's it for all our questions. So thank you so much, everyone, for staying this long. We really appreciate everyone and all of the feedback. And I just want to mention again, written comments. If you think of new things or want to put some thoughts in writing, again, engagekingston.com. We promise to read every single one of them, and we'll give everyone a response. So please submit your thoughts there, or you can also send them directly to Bartek. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have that screen again for the? Do you have that screen again for? Okay. Nice seeing you. Always good to see you.
But, passing lesson. That's why it was such a big issue. Yeah.